Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new YouTube channel, Everything Digital Health, which I've decided to start in an effort to have a place that we can talk about everything that is to do with digital health, possibly being a little bit more honest and a bit more direct than in some of the other places that you see digital health being discussed. So no webinars, no sort of virtue signaling, but lots of zone of uncomfortable debate. That's the idea of the channel, and it's very early days and it's going to evolve, but I hope you'll find something interesting here. So today is our first episode, and I am very lucky to have Joe McDonald, the founder of the Great North Care Record, as a guest. Joe is very well known in NHS IT circles, having been excreted from the National Project for IT for what he calls career-limiting frankness. Over the years, he's been on the inside working as an orthodox member of the sort of clinical informatics and health tech bourgeoisie, inside the big central organizations. And then he's also taken a turn as something of a rebel and a rule breaker. So he's got a good perspective. He's a retired psychiatrist, children's psychiatrist, and is still heavily involved in health IT. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that, Joe? What your current role, things like that?
I'll just pick you up on one thing, Marcus. Not so much of the retired. I actually got my license to practice back last week. So if you go on the register, I've got the green tick that says I'm back. Because I didn't know how important being a consultant psychiatrist was to me, and the possibility that I might go back and do it again, having seen what I've recently seen.
Interesting.
At HIMSS. Obviously, I
I'm
was at
back
HIMSS.
and I'm angry.
Well, it's not so much back and angry. I'm back and weirdly optimistic, Marcus. The things I've seen, frankly, at HIMSS recently and in other places, actually, I was a bit of a AI skeptic, to be honest, and I'm not anymore. As of this week, I'm a believer. And I think AI ambient scribes are about to put the fun back into medicine and take away much of the drudgery. So yeah, I'm a changed man, and I'm back on the register with a license to practice because I think it might be fun. The
Well,
bit I
that's
always
very
enjoyed,
interesting.
the bit I always enjoyed was the conversations with the patients. The bit I hated was writing it all up at the end. You don't have to do that anymore. That bit's going to go, and it's going to go very soon.
Wow. Okay. That sounds really exciting, and that would definitely change my outlook on my medical practice as well.
Honestly, Marcus, until you've seen it, it's just mind blowing. All of the drudgery taken away. Imagine that. You pop the phone down between you and the patient, right? And you say, "You mind if I record this session?" And they're used to having everything recorded on the phone anyway, so they just mostly say yes. But it's not a disaster if they say no. Just have to do it the old way. But you put the phone down between you and the patient, and it records the consultation, transcribes it, writes up a summary, composes the letter to the GP, and all you have to do is press stop at the end. It's un. Am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Yeah, I think swearing will probably happen.
It's unfucking believable. That's what it is. And it will absolutely change the game. It might even save the NHS. So I know I'm often a bit of a gloomster. I mean, people joke about Waldorf and Statler, but actually, I'm a bit of a born again psychiatrist who is contemplating going back into practice because they've made medicine fun again, to borrow a phrase from overseas, and it's unbelievable.
Well, that does sound pretty cool, actually. I
It
can
is
imagine that
cool.
in general practice, that would completely transform it. I mean, you're used to having constrained, short appointments, and then you gotta write it up in some kind of sensible way.
Yeah.
And so these things, are they, presumably they're all commercial offerings, and there's a company behind it with venture capital, and they want to make their money back. So how is it looking in terms of pricing?
I think it will depend how your provider prices it, but you get so much time back. You see, I had a fantasy years ago when I first got involved. I remember when I was a junior doctor, I spent my first month's salary. I spent it on a Lippmann cardiology stethoscope because it was so much better than
Yeah.
what the NHS was supplying on the wards. So I bought my own, and it was gorgeous. It was heavy, it was black. I had my name engraved on it so that it wouldn't get stolen by senior doctors around me. And it was so gorgeous that I was willing to spend my own money on it because it would make me a better practitioner, it would make me a better doctor. I could hear things that other people couldn't hear.
Uh-huh.
And
Okay, I see where you're going.
I wanted an EPR that I would be willing to pay a month's salary for. And I think that's the how you should judge whether an EPR is any good. Is would the doctor, with his own money, out of his own first month's wages, pay to have a certain system? And I would pay to have the functionality that I've seen. Just because it would make life so much easier than it is now. And I remember 15 years ago, I drew out a fantasy EPR on a little piece of paper, with all the functionality I'd want, including being able to press a button to speak to the patient, press a button to email the patient, press a button to record the patient, press a button. All of these fantasy features are now real.
Yeah.
They're within reach, and it's a massive leap forward. 25% of a consultant psychiatrist's time is spent seeing patients, 75% doing something else, and much of the something else is writing it up,
Yeah,
and dealing with dreadful systems.
absolutely. And we
And
spend a lot of our time doing admin in general practice. So you see the patients, but then you end up with a list of things that needs to be done as a result of seeing them, referrals, blood tests, and things like that. It'd be nice to see some of that being automated away. And
Marcus, the AI is popping up the blood tests that you need to do, and it's popping up, everything. It's checking the, it's
yeah,
doing the, um, assisting you to make decision assistance is in there as well. But it will, as the conversation develops, the list of blood tests that you want also develops, and all you have to do at the end is just, yeah, let's do that. Actually, you don't have to touch it because the voice recognition is so good. Also, throw out your speech recognition package because it's all in there. It's
yeah.
all in.
Speech recognition was always a stepping stone on the way to this.
Yeah,
We need to have speech recognition, but now what happens is it summarizes all that. So instead of getting endless ambient discussion of just sort of ambling around the subject, you actually can get a summary at the end that says, right, that's for the GP, that's the bit that goes in the notes, these are the tests you do, and you can condense it right down. So I'm going to push back a little bit and just say I'd love to see all this happen, right? But how do you see this actually happening in the real NHS that we all know and love? I'll say.
Well, I needed to get an interest in Marcus because I work as a sort of peripatetic medical director for a number of software houses, including the Access Group, who produce Rio, which is the EPR used by most mental health trusts, especially since the demise of Advanced. Rio has a very big market share, but it is rolling out this ambient technology as we speak. And I've got to say, trusts are fighting to get to the top of the queue to implement. I've never seen that. I've never seen people gagging for a software package. It's
Yeah.
astonishing. I've never seen anything like it. Normally, I've been inflicting digital paper on people for 15 years and making life harder than it was on paper. But now we've actually got pull. People want
Yeah.
these features, and I understand. I mean, my own cynicism has been has been blown away in recent weeks, to the
Yeah.
point where I might go back into practice because all the good bits will be all you have to do.
Well, I mean, that just the fact that you'd want to go back into practice of having retired is quite an impressive sort of signal, as it were, to pick up, that somebody wants to do that.
But
My,
yeah,
I like you, have been an AI skeptic for a while. And I think that partly the AI has improved, but also our expectations have become a bit more tamed about what is realistic and how it can be done safely. So now
yeah.
we've gone from the fanboys of AI 3 years ago were trotting out all kinds of stuff, just as they did a few years before that. There was the blockchain fanboys, and then I was reading some stuff from 10 years ago where the big data fanboys were also making all the wild claims. Whereas this feels like it's now settling into
Well, to be honest, Marcus, I was at HIMSS last year. Now, HIMSS is a massive tech show, annual tech show in the United States, and just to tell you how big it is slash was before COVID, there's 72,000 delegates, and there are 6,000 trade stands. And the keynote
wow.
speaker, the one that was cancelled just before COVID, keynote speaker was Donald Trump. That's how big this show is. And it's,
Bloody hell.
it's
Yeah.
absolutely massive. And the keynote speaker at this year's HIMSS was Simone Biles, the famous gold medal winning gymnast, and victim of sexual abuse, who very bravely
Right.
spoke out about it. But we're talking global megastars here turn up and speak at this event. Last year, it was all about AI, and I was like, you know what? It's blockchain, isn't it? It's big data. It'll be the same old story. Everybody be trying to sell this rubbish, and I largely dismissed it. But I have seen it for myself now,
Hmm.
and it is astonishing. It's just unbelievable. And it will be transformative. I genuinely think it might save the NHS.
Yeah.
Certainly
It
productivity, which is
definitely make a
stalled.
big difference. Yeah.
Yeah, and the
And
other
the
the other
idea
thing is, go on,
that
Marcus.
the idea that you trade the time that you would have spent hand typing all this stuff and editing and getting your transcript, as it were, your notes of the record down to what you want to put into the EPR, can be done for you, and you spend some of that time, but not all of that time, checking what's been done. And so as long as we don't ever throw out the checking bit, because I think that was some of the stuff that was alarming about the work that NHS England are doing with discharge summaries that are meant to be checked by a junior doctor, and they'll be AI generated out of the entire patient's stay. And the worrying areas of that is when you aren't familiar with a patient. So you're the junior doctor. You've been called on a Sunday afternoon to check a discharge summary because we want to get somebody home to clear that bed, which is the sad reality. Is that you will be pulled in to see a patient and write a discharge summary for a patient you've never met. That it would, with a patient that you haven't met, it would take you nearly as long to fact check everything that the AI has put into the discharge summary as it would to just write the discharge summary yourself. But this is a different kettle of fish. You were there in the consultation. It's all fresh in your memory. You can look at what it's synopsized, and it's created your little vignette that's like, that's going in the EPR, and this bit is the letter that's going to go to the GP. Could be the same. It could be the same thing. I mean, pretty much the same stuff. But it's all fresh in your memory. So it's not at all the fairly weak use case that the NHSE FDP pilot is currently working on. This is much more like, I can vet this immediately. I know all the facts because I was right there, and
Yeah,
I can correct anything that was not right and then send.
I mean the thing, th- that's exactly true, and I think one of the important things about this technology is, I think it's really important that it's not a medical device. It's just a really clever dictaphone, and you get to decide at the end. You literally get to check it and decide if if the summary is correct. That human element, I think, has to be there. But in that consultation, as you say, you are there, you know what happened. Although here's the weird thing, actually, when we've been testing it, people would sometimes say, "Oh no, that's not quite how it went down." And you've got the audio recording. You can go back to it and go, "Actually, that is exactly how it went down."
Yeah.
And so you've got the recording if you need to go back and check, or you're not sure. Um,
So
a
what's the
lot of
fate of the audio recordings? Is the idea that they're just kept for posterity? Because I know we're in the sort of culture of keeping everything, but as a patient, I'm not sure I'd want that a permanent audio recording of the consultation.
Well, in Rio, we're going to automatically delete it when the doctor says that's a proper summary of what happened. So we'll be
Right.
automatically deleting the recording. Um,
That sounds good.
uh, but I guess that's a decision for each organisation to make. But I don't suppose the NHS will want to be storing and paying for storing all of that, all of that audio, which would get pricey, I reckon.
It will get pricey, but and it also brings in medical legal issues that suddenly we've got to cross, which is, if there is an audio recording of every consultation ever, then that's the first thing that will be required if you're ever defending your medical actions. And
Yeah,
and whilst it would be good in a way for both parties to have an absolutely impartial record, sometimes that isn't quite how things went in terms of the real consultation that they ask from the patient, and that it loses all of the non-verbal cues and the
yeah.
other stuff that wasn't in the recording. Um,
I mean, it's
so
it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the airline pilots are recorded the whole time. Um,
yeah, although it only saves the last few hours of conversation. So I don't know if that's a technical limitation of the black box itself, but um, there's kind of older conversation that's always dropping off the end and being
yeah,
forgotten.
yeah.
Um,
So I think it's sort of equivalent to that. I mean, I know that the body worn camera has largely replaced the policeman's notebook, and who knows
yeah.
where this goes. All I know is that it makes medicine fun again and takes all the drudgery out of it,
Yeah.
in a
And
in a
well,
an amazing
there are
way.
always going to be challenges for us to solve in making healthcare better. It's a continuous cycle of improvement, isn't it? And so, yes,
Except
we're,
I think the EPR, the electronic patient record, probably made life harder for us than when I was a boy doctor, and I could write everything I needed on a half-sized A4 card in
yeah,
A&E and sum up a consultation as, PFO, piston fell over, NBI, no bony injury, TTFO, told to fuck off.
yes.
And recording was so much easier on paper in A&E. I sometimes think A&E would be better off going back on paper, to be honest, given
Yeah.
how long the waiting times are there.
Well,
But I think ambient will change all that.
ambient. I think A&E will prove to be one of those very, very difficult deployment environments for ambient, because it's great for a GP surgery in a room with just you and the patient. It's great in psychiatry clinic, and it'll be great for many other areas, but it won't be as good in a noisy, busy environment. And there will be significant privacy issues, I would imagine, about you being in one booth recording, in resus, when potentially that might be picked up by other ambient AIs being recorded in other booths of A&E. So maybe the solution is different for them. Maybe it is they go back to paper, give that to a scanner and the AI will summarize it
Maybe,
from there.
maybe. I imagine your A&E doctor will in future always be wearing a headset of some description, and being able to have what he's saying scribed, without having to write it all down. We've been testing the ambient scribe in Rio in difficult environments, and it's just gone up a level, Marcus. It's you can have a dog barking in the background, doesn't pick that up, or it's only picking up the voices that are really close. So it's just so much better than it was a year ago. Like I said at HIMSS last year, everybody banging on about AI, nobody could show me anything, but now
Right.
it's for real.
Well, I think that's very cool. I think if it could decompress our workflows and make things better, then that will automatically release a bit of time to do other things that need to be done. So, for example, I mean, what if we're doing things with increasing computerization and AI? Then one of the big infrastructural misses of the past couple of decades is that we didn't put APIs behind everything. So there is no API for ordering blood tests. So that's where human middleware comes in. So we will end up sadly at a situation where the AI has listed the bloods to be done, and then some scutter will have to manually do that because we still haven't made it so that computers can automatically at least create a list of the tests so that a doctor can review it. And that's the hard work that needs to be done next, then, is to make everything an API so that it can be much more automated. And you still want to have clinicians in charge of the approval step. So everything should be, here are the recommended blood tests, sir. And I should be the person saying approved. And then then it happens. But I don't want to be the person who has to manually transcribe it into the ICE system in a hospital, or who has to go and take whatever X-ray form they're currently using. That can be a digital form, or in some places it's still a paper form, down the corridor to go and get a CT scan because it's been recommended by the trauma AI. We need to absolutely make sure that we don't end up subordinate to the AIs and having to do the kind of junior doctor chasing work because we're the only things, we got fingers and hands and we can do the human middleware that the AI can't do.
I think the smarter EPR providers will be looking to integrate this stuff in such a way that that some of that drudgery is also taken care of, and that will mean a different approach by some of our system suppliers. I mean, the other thing about it, you were saying to me the other day, why go to HIMSS? One of the reasons you have to go to HIMSS is to realise that the NHS IT market is just a pimple on the backside of the USA market. And the other reason you go to HIMSS is to see just how much money and the Americans have got to spend on IT. 6,000 stands. There's an app for everything, and everybody's doing quite nicely. You can go and stand on the stands of the bigger providers, and the carpet that comes up over the welts of your boots. There's that much money spent on the stand. You'll get it offered a massage while you're being talked to by a salesperson, and it's just before COVID. Actually, I persuaded Matthew Gould to come out to HIMSS because I wanted him to understand where we stood in the world, which is virtually nowhere in comparison to the size of the US market. And I wanted him to understand just how much money these companies are making. And I always think, if you're buying software from a company, just check if they've got a Formula One team or if the owner of the company has their own jumbo jet. Because if they have, you might be paying slightly over the odds from what you could get locally. Just saying.
Yeah. I think HIMSS would blow my mind. Like, me, I'm a sort of like sit at home coding kind of open source guy. I think the idea of
You have to
like
go.
that
You
level of
have to go and
opulence.
see it. You have to go and see it. It's the only way you can understand the global health IT marketplace is to go and feel the carpet on the Epic stand.
Wow, a carpet biopsy. Yeah.
Yeah. And look out across the vastness. Go up to the top of the Microsoft stand because they have a 2-story stand, and you can see across the whole floor. You can see all 6,000 vendors, uh, and it's a bit like the closing scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark, because it's this vast, vast warehouse in which the thing that you're looking for is lost among the many other things hiding in plain sight. So
Wow.
you have to come next year, Marcus. It's in Vegas. Um,
I understand. So yes, there is also a Europe, isn't there? There's a HIMSS Europe that's thinking
it's
Paris
not
or
the
something.
same. It's not the
Not the
same.
same.
There's no Formula One cars or private jumbo jets, but it's got to be. Yeah, you have to go next year. We'll have some fun.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll take you up on that. Let's go. Um,
Book it now,
so
though.
let's have a bit of a gear change, because you mentioned when you were there that there were some issues with the long arm of Doge starting to reach in. So this is a little bit
Yeah.
topical political. Hopefully, this won't be the future, but tell us about that.
Well, it was a crazy time to be in the States. So DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, which is a worryingly Orwellian sounding sort of outfit,
Yes.
um, but with very real consequences. So I go to a lot of the sessions at HIMSS, which are not very glamorous. They're for people from government, and it's people like the Veterans Administration and the Ministry of Justice. And there was an entire afternoon I had planned where I would meet with other, the American government people, civil servants, IT bods, trying to do the right thing with not very much, and generally good people, and the entire afternoon of speakers, which was four speakers, all of them were cancelled, either because they'd lost their jobs or they were fighting to
Wow.
keep their jobs. And there were lots of people in corridors having worried phone calls throughout the week, wondering if they had jobs to go back to, because they're doing the Twitter thing where they just sack everybody and see who's missed, and it looks like it looks a little bit like NHS England are picking up the baton on that, given the announcements recently. And
Yeah.
I get it. I get it that government departments can get bloated, but at the same time, uh, there's a certain level of insanity to just saying, "Oh, we don't need all these people. Let's just get rid of them all," or "We don't need half these people." There ought to be some sort of, well, which of these departments actually do we think we might not need anymore, rather than the salami slicing that we tend to do, and
Yeah.
the good ones get wind and leave, and you end up distilling down to your least capable people,
Well,
because the good ones
this is
leave.
exactly it. I mean, there's no simple way and no sort of straight ruler. You can just take the Stanley knife along and cut off all the waste, because the waste is mixed in with the good stuff.
Yeah,
It's kind
yeah.
of it's a bit almost of the human condition that life is a mixed ability room, and you are always dealing with people, some who are better, some whom are not as good, and it's absolutely mathematically provable that 50% of people are below average. And if you
Yeah.
get rid of those 50% of people, do you know what? You've still got 50% of people below average. Just maybe your average has gone up. But the sacking all the Doge people, I mean, that they immediately made missteps, didn't they? They sacked a load of nuclear safety inspectors and they sacked a load of air traffic controllers, and then went, "Oh,
Yeah.
actually, no, that's not waste. We'll put them back."
I
Having
mean, they
caused
they
chaos.
sacked all they sacked all the janitors in Las Vegas, so nobody could get into any of the buildings that they looked after. That they had to unsack them pretty quick, and so there's a certain amount of, oh yeah, let's be more efficient, but at the same time, there's a certain amount of sanity required, and that
Well,
seemed largely to be missing in the United States at the minute.
it also depends on what you mean by efficiency, right? So efficiency in any system is like you have a desired output and you measure the desired inputs that are required to get the output. So if it's thermal efficiency, that's very mathematical. But when you're talking about governmental efficiency, That's much harder to measure. And if you've got something like, you mentioned Epic have got their own plane and they're very, very thick carpets and luscious, luxurious stand. Is that efficient? I mean, it depends what the efficiency.
Well,
What are we trying
it's
to
working
achieve?
for them. It's working for them, isn't it? That would seem to be an efficient use of money.
Well, it's an efficient use of in our case, taxpayer money. So
yeah,
for their,
like I say, private jumbo jet, Formula One team. Yeah,
yeah,
work it
it's
out.
taking our taxpayer money and efficiently spending it on very rich people. Now, that if you're a very rich person, that might it be your definition of efficiency, but it isn't my definition as a taxpayer.
No, there's got to be. Well, my feeling is that somewhere in this process, the decimal point got moved. We're not building nuclear powered aircraft carriers here. We're not sending anybody to the moon, which I think you can reasonably expect to spend billions on that sort of thing. But we're talking about clinical software. When did it start to cost billions? Software, billions? No. I mean, we need a reset, don't we? Just because we paid $1 billion for it last time doesn't mean that it's actually that's nuts actually, because the price of everything comes down, doesn't it? Except clinical
It's supposed
software.
to. It's supposed to, as things
Except
become
our stuff.
commoditized.
Yeah.
But one thing that's not happened in healthcare software is the commodification of the lower levels. So you imagine going back over the last couple of decades, you've got very simple systems like lab systems, your patient administration systems, your order com systems, your radiology systems, and then gradually we've walked up that sort of ascent of man to where we are now, which is an EPR. But none of those systems have become commodified to the point you could push them into the sort of I don't care about it layer. We just use a virtually free one. But in the rest of the in the rest of the tech world outside of health tech, that's what's happened. So if you think 30 years ago, you would probably have to pay for an enterprise operating system. You'd pay for Unix, and you'd pay to have a program on there that was a web server. And you'd pay if you wanted a database. You'd have to buy a proprietary database. Now, there is no one in their right mind that's paying for a Unix operating system because everybody uses Linux. Nobody is paying for a web server because there are free and open source options that abound. And the same with databases. I think the vast majority of organizations are using free open source databases like PostgreSQL. So all of that stuff has been pushed into a commoditized layer that makes it so cheap that you've got standards. It's essentially a standardization layer as well, because once everybody's using Apache as a web server, that just means that the skill set is standardized, it's cheaper to build, it's free to obtain, and then you can put your money into building the next bit on top, which is the value add of your app or your platform or whatever it is. We haven't got that in healthcare. We're still paying the same amount of money for our PAS, OrderComs, DICOM systems.
Let me give you an example, Marcus. 20 years ago, my wife and I built a small villa rental business. And in order to DalianVillas.com, still out there, I think. We sold the business some years ago, but it's still out there if you would like to rent a villa in Dalian. If only we called it globalvillas.com. Damn it. But I built the website for that with software called Microsoft FrontPage, which came on a CD-ROM. You put it on your computer, and it was a WYSIWYG web design. And the CD-ROM cost me £400. Now, you get website development software now free when you buy a domain name from GoDaddy for £1.99. So that software has gone down and down and down in price to the point where they're actually giving it away now as an extra. And for some reason, healthcare has been immune to the normal falling price that you would get in the rest of the tech market. And it's very strange. And it's because I think we mark the price of these things on what we paid last time, which is crazy. It should be half what you paid last time, pretty
Yeah.
much every year. But
It's also our lack of interoperability means that a disruptor, even if they existed, can't really get into the market. So if you came along and you said, I've got an EPR that's as good as Epic, that is a tenth of the price, that's disruption. That's like driving everything right down. But
that's why I work
they
at the Access Group, Marcus.
you
Tenth of the
can't
price.
you wouldn't be able to get into existing healthcare IT markets with that approach, because there's the pain that would be undergone by the clinical staff moving to a new EPR, and the fact that it's very difficult to move the records from the old EPR to the new EPR without losing a load of detail. That is a very hard braking effect on any kind of disruption, and we won't really escape that until we've got a way of losslessly moving medical data between different types of EPRs, or even better, just having where an EPR becomes a viewer, a little bit like a web browser. Any web browser can view any web page.
So
And you've got your choice of web browsers and you've got your choice of web pages, and they all work.
yeah,
That's where we need to get to.
and that's the Australian IT strategy. I was in Australia recently, and their IT strategy is focused entirely on interoperability. It's all they're interested in. They've set up an entire government department to make sure that things interoperate. They'll legislate if they have to. So we're busy writing a 10-year plan. We've all seen it. It's nuts, and the the,
Well,
the
don't blow any gaffs on that, because we will be coming back to that on in this channel. I think it's very important that we wait for it to be fully published, and
yeah.
then we can nuke it from orbit.
Right, fair enough. The fact of the matter is that the Australians have produced, I think, a really good IT strategy. And sometimes you just got to hold your hands up and say, "That's brilliant. Would you mind awfully if we just copied it?" Because that would be a really sensible thing to do. In terms of they've got their, they've got their ducks all in a row around. You know what the problem is? The problem is that none of this stuff interoperates. And until we fix that, it will stay broken,
Yeah.
and we'll stay paying through the nose for it. And they've got it absolutely right. And people like Kate Ebrell, who's leading the development of the interoperability community in Australia, and that's what it is, and that's what it requires, the development of a community who will literally set the standards for everything and make sure that everything interoperates. I went to one of their meetings. It was a 2-day meeting attended by about 100 people, mixture of clinicians and IT bods and some government folk. And for example, they spent half an hour um, detailing how to record whether or not somebody's pregnant or not. And on the face of it, that sounds really simple. Actually, it's a bit more complicated, because
Yeah.
have they had the test? How early was the test? Is the test positive or negative? And what's the failure rate on the test? And we had this long debate, and they ended up writing out a standard way of recording pregnant, not, maybe, etc. And they had a method if there was disagreement for most items, how to record blood pressure, etc., or pregnancy, gender is more complicated than you'd think. These things require a standard way of recording them.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
would go through it as a bunch of clinicians and a bunch of IT folk. And mostly they reach a consensus and say, well, that's the standard now. And then they'd publish it, and everybody would be able to work with it. Even the vendors like it, because they get a standard way of recording things. So their
It saves
biggest
them a
ask
huge
is,
amount of time. If they've got an out of the box ready-made data model for medicine,
exactly,
that saves them a
exactly.
huge amount of time, because clinically modeling all this stuff, as the open EHR community can tell you, is
Yeah,
huge. It's a huge project. It takes decades in some cases,
yeah.
and you've got to manage all that
Uh,
disagreement and the different use cases across what I'm using as a blood pressure in general practice is different from a blood pressure that's been taken once a second by an
yeah,
intraarterial blood pressure line in
So,
ICU,
so
all
they're
that stuff.
going. So the Australians are going through this stuff line by line, doing the hard work to make it simple. In the words of Tom
Awesome.
Loosemore, and they're literally doing the hard work, and they meet every 2 weeks and bottom gender or blood pressure. And if they can't agree, they have a voting system. And, the decisions are made by the people who are in the room. And if you're not there, well, tough. That's the standard. But it was exciting to see that somebody's grasped the nettle. Open Air is sitting under a lot of it actually, and that's their go-to. That's their starting point.
Yeah.
If there's an existing standard, use it. Don't reinvent the wheel the
Brilliant.
whole time. So
Well,
I just
that's
think
very encouraging,
it,
because
it
I would
is.
think that if one of the things that we don't even see the success of interoperability in some other parts of the tech industry. For example, just the very simple fact that standards like open document formats exist. So we've got the Open Document Foundation, which produces a whole load of open ones, but that forced Microsoft to essentially open up the standards behind .docx and .pptx and those kind of things. But Microsoft were not going to do that until they were forced. But once that happened, it means that I can email you a document and you can use whatever program you want to read that document. Whereas in health tech, we are stuck with databases containing the entire patient records of everybody that's at my organization. But if I want to send some information about any of those to you in your organization with your database in your EPR, we've got a complete mismatch. And we've got the worst end of interoperability in that it just does not function. Whereas there are other areas where it works really well, and they are all using files. They're all able to export the entire thing that you're talking about as a file. I've got a friend who works for as a sound editor for Netflix and various other companies. And when I tried to explain interoperability and particularly our difficulties with it to him, he couldn't understand what we were talking about, because he said, well, don't you just send the files like I do? And he's working at massive scale with enormous files. But in his industry, everything is a standardized file format. So the video comes in standardized file formats. You can convert between standardized file formats, and you can get the audio. And he might have 500 stems of audio that he's got to boil down to the final mixed product, which is going to go straight onto Netflix servers and go out the next day. Never a mention of interoperability problems, because it's all just files. Yeah. And that's where we've got to get to. Databases are harmful.
It is hard work, and I think that's partly why we haven't done it, is because it's hard. But it would require a phenomenal change in direction and strategy, which I had hoped I would see with the new government, but I'm not seeing it at the moment, I have to say. And I genuinely, I'd love to get Wes Streeting out to Australia to meet his equivalent, because they have got it there. They've absolutely understood it, grasped it, and they've invested $17 million in growing a community.
Yeah.
And having it meet and having it make standards that everybody can agree on. And the industry players, they're all there, and they've just published their international patient summary standard, which I think the
That's all
world
very
should
exciting.
adopt.
I feel as though that actually deserves its own episode, really. We need to come back to that and talk about the Sparked Initiative and Australia, and maybe
I'll
even
tell
get
you
some
what,
people on who.
you should get Kate Ebrill on, and maybe she'll tell you what Sparks are up to. Absolutely sensational person, and
Right, let's do it.
really entertaining speaker
Let's
as
do that.
well.
So I think, I mean, we've covered a fair bit today. We've brought in ambient AI assistants and how it's going to make medicine fun again. And we've talked about hymns and why I should go and experience the depth of the carpet and Epic's stand. So I'd just like to thank you for your time, and we'll definitely do this again. I think we need to. There's other things that we wanted to talk about today that we didn't get around to, like productivity, burnout, and discretionary effort and stuff like that. So that again, they deserve their own time to sort of really dig in. So I think if we leave it there and we'll just get you back, Joe, because we've got so much to talk about, and no one is talking about this stuff. So let's put it all out there front and center and make medicine fun again.